Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the 10-minute Bible lesson. I know sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more. Hey, we've been searching in the book of Psalms, and we're picking out verses that we think that would be an encouragement to us. And we're going to be looking today in Psalm 34. And our first verse will be verse 8. But I want to mention this, that the previous verses, like the previous 4 verses, kind of help explain verse 8. And we'll be talking about that as we go. But let's go ahead and read Psalm 34, verse 8. So he says this, he says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him." Now, I'm sure that all of us have had something that we found to eat that we thought it really, really tastes good. And what do we do when we find that? We want somebody else to taste it. And we'll ask them, we'll say, and even if they don't want to, we may still encourage them, say, "Oh, come on, just try it. Just taste and just see if it tastes good." I think all of us have done that. In a way, that's what the psalmist is saying here. He's saying, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." Now, we're going to be looking here just in a second at the verses, that 4 verses before verse 8. That would be verse 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we're going to see in these verses how it explains that when we taste of the Lord, that it is good. And so these verses will show that the Lord is good. But in this verse right here, he encourages us just to try the Lord. Just, I know this sounds really weird, take a big bite. I mean, just jump in to a relationship with the Lord and just see if he's not good. And then he says this, he says, "Blessed is a man who trusts in him." In other words, everyone that puts their trust in the Lord will be blessed. Well, let's go ahead and look at Psalm 34, verse 4. And let's just see if it gives us a good reason to explain why the Lord is good. And so it says this. He said, "I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all my fears." And I just want to mention how important it is for us to seek the Lord. And we have to make an effort to have a relationship with him. We want to come before him. And how we do that is we do that in prayer. And we speak to the Lord. And I was just thinking what the psalmist said here. He said, "I sought the Lord, and he heard me." Now, all of us like for people to listen to us. I mean, all of us get a little irritated when we're trying to explain something to someone, and you can tell by their body motions that they're not interested and they're not listening. But when we have somebody that we capture their attention and they're listening to everything that we say, we appreciate that. Now, what if it would be the Lord himself? So that's what the psalmist said. He said, "I sought the Lord, and he heard me." And then he said, "He delivered me from all my fears." All of us have fears. I know you may have said, "I'm not afraid of nothing," and that's just not true. All of us have fears of different kind, even fears for our own self. And we have sometimes fears for those that are close to us and we love. The psalmist said this, that the Lord heard him when he sought him, and he delivered him from all of his fears. Now that's something to think about, because remember in verse 8 it says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." And here's one way that proves that the Lord is good. Well, let's look at verse 5. That is Psalm 34, verse 5. Here's what the psalmist said. He says, "They looked to him and were radiant, and their faces were not ashamed." So I'm taking from this verse the word faces and the word radiant, and I'm thinking about it in the context of what a person looks like. I don't mean how handsome or how pretty they are. I just mean this, that there's something about someone who loves the Lord. I mean, I know I'm kind of going out on a limb a little bit here, but when I say this, you can almost see it in them. In other words, you can almost see it in the countenance of their face, or in their eyes, or in the way that they conduct themselves. And I see here that David says they looked to him and were radiant. I know when Moses went up on the mountain at the time that he spent with God, the 40 days and 40 nights when he came down, his face shined. Notice something else about this verse. It says, and their faces were not ashamed. And I just think this is what this means, that those that trust in the Lord will not be put to shame. Listen, before I trusted in the Lord and before I followed him, I had shame. There were so many things that I did that I was ashamed of, and I regret, and on so many different occasions, but I've never, ever regretted trusting in the Lord. I've never been ashamed of that, and I think that's what he's saying here. Well, let's jump to the next verse. That'd be verse 6. So Psalm 34, 6. Now we're still looking at why it's good to take a taste of the Lord. So Psalm 34, 6 says, this poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. I love the fact how the psalmist identifies himself as a poor man. Now, I don't necessarily think he's talking about money. He may be, but I think he's talking about how he feels about himself, that he realizes that he's an insignificant person, and all of us have felt that way before. Sometimes we get kind of down on ourselves and we think nobody cares, nobody's watching, we don't matter to anybody. But I thought it was so neat that the psalmist said this. He said, this poor man cried out to the Lord, and the Lord heard him. And then the Lord did something for him. What did he do? He saved him out of all of his troubles. Now, I mentioned last time that all of us have troubles. And if you don't have any troubles now, listen, just stick around. You'll have some. In fact, I use a verse from the book of Job where he said, man that is born of woman is a few years and full of troubles. So we all have troubles, but notice what he says here. He says this, he says that he saved him out of his troubles. Now, he didn't say that he saved him from his troubles, but he saved him out of his troubles. Well, let's look at the last verse, and that is verse 7. So Psalm 34, 7 says this. This is a really cool verse. This is the last one. It says, the angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him and delivers them. Now, that's a comforting thought. And remember, all of these verses that were previous to verse 8, and verse 8 told us that to taste the Lord and see that he's good. All of these verses tell us how good he is. He's good to us because he sends his angels to those who trust him and fear him, that is, that have an awesome respect and awe for a mighty, powerful, holy God. And we should fear the Lord because he's so great and so powerful and so awesome. But notice what he says. He says the angel of the Lord encamps around those that fear him. Now that should be a comforting thing for us. You may not have thought that outside of your bedroom window there was a camp, and the camp was a camp of angels. You know, the angels are different than we are. They're different created beings. They're more powerful than we are. They're more mighty than we are. They're just different than we are. And God uses them to minister to those who believe in him and trust in him. I think it's a comfort to know that his angels are sent to encamp around those that fear him. Well, I tell you, I've enjoyed all of these verses, and I just want to read the first one again, where David says, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Hey, thank you for tuning in today. I hope you have a really good week, and if you have time, get into the book of Psalms and read some verses.